We are in a series of videos where I'm trying to quickly summarize some of the key words and concepts of geographical thought. So it's a very technical area, definitely not for the GS students, but should come handy for almost all geography optional students. Not enough to have all concepts to become a part of answer, but fairly good enough to help you conceptualize the idea and maybe develop a base to revise further from here on. So I'm discussing the social relevance revolution, also referred to as the radical revolution, a trend that started in the 60s and 70s. So it's like a progressive change in terms of content, focus, methods, objectives in geography. So if you trace geography right from the regional paradigm, it moves on towards the debates around determinism, possibilism, that gets resolved. We have the beginnings of the QR phase, a very powerful paradigm phase, and systematically it was deconstructed by the backlashes and modified. So if you trace the history of geography in a timeline, so this is something happening in the 1960s and 70s, and that was a time when we had inequalities across US and across Europe, partly as a consequence of the economic downturns, the recession, the Great Depression and its after consequences. We also had the civil rights movement, the rights of the Afro-Americans in the US. We had the feminist movement starting off here. So a lot of concerns around unemployment, essentially a time when we had lot of social turmoil. We had lot of social churning happening. It was in this context that geographers, like many other scholars, are debating on the relevance of geography and methods and content of geography is to keep themselves relevant to social issues. And this is a bit of a frustration for the geographers who cannot justify mechanically studying geography and not putting geographical knowledge to use for dealing with problems of society, be it poverty, be it unemployment, be it the ghettoism, be it crimes, or even the violence because of the racial discrimination, the women issues. So it was in that kind of a political atmosphere, a social political atmosphere, the geography is seeking to reinvent itself. And I think most of you know a very momentous 1970-71 when Wilbur Zelensky, as the president of AAG, Association of American Geographers, makes a very powerful point and a case to develop geography as a more problem-solving discipline. Geography as more relevant to dealing with social problems rather than mechanically focused on making models and theories which are suddenly looking irrelevant in a politically charged environment. So I expect to remember this man, Wilbur Zelensky, the same man who also gave us the demographic transition model and what's also called as and its application to migration. So we have migration theory that correlates migration with demographic transition by Wilbur Zelensky. So in this revolution, there were two schools of thought. There were one, social democrats, also called themselves as liberals or reformists, who believed the solutions to social problems and political turmoils lay in reforms, progressive reforms, progressive legislative changes, which would start getting sensitized towards problems of poverty, inequalities. So they were concerned about the problems, but they saw no reason why the existing system should be entirely thrown out. So they were not really the anarchists. They were against the idea of anarchism and disruptions by violence. So they believed in reforms. And this is a very important man, David Smith. He writes the book, Welfare Geography in Geography. And the theme that they're all dealing with is inequalities. So this is a very, very important statement that almost captures the scope of welfare geography. Who gets what, where and how? Who, as in the people who are ostracized or those who are poor, who are denied rights. It's about what goods, what services can they access, where do they live, where do they work, and what processes operate in discriminating. So the study of who gets what, where and how, and solving problems of inequality was the major theme of welfare geography. And from this, there was also the rise of environmentalism. Environmentalism, where the concerns are about environmental despoliation, environmental degradation, soil erosion, water problems, even the concept of limits to growth and concerns for the carrying capacity of the environment. So these thinking were largely the outgrowth of the welfare geography. And welfare geography in many ways continues to be relevant in our applied approaches. So this is one of the paradigms, still relevant. And the other school, a very powerful school that at least impacted the thought processes of students and teachers, if not as popular because it was Marxist in approach. This is the radical geography. This is the new school of radicalism in geography. Again, be careful. Radical geography is not same as radical revolution. Just as behavioral geography is not same as behavioral revolution, similarly, radical revolution encompasses the two backlashes. Now, in radical geography, as the name suggests, it was innovation in America because communism and Marxism were not the popular words. So they had to look for alternative words, but it was eventually actually Marxist ideas. So Marxism, the revolutionary ideas, and they talked about challenging status quo. That's very important. In fact, the radicals blamed the reformists as status quoists. The radicals labeled the reformists as neoconservatives, and whereas they themselves thought that they were the revolutionaries who would fight the political system and replace it. The radicalists were against reforms. They saw reforms more like a mere whitewashing of the facade, not really the deep intentioned changes that reforms can bring in. So they were against reforms, and they saw the solution to be revolutionary, challenge like what Marx would have suggested. So they were anti-capitalist. They were the ones who were trying to promote the idea of organizing the masses as a part of labor movements. So if we can realize all of this is happening, the typical post-Fordist capitalism, and people who talked about this were also anarchists, disruptors of the regular political systems. So we had Folk, we have Anuchin, we have David Harvey, we have Pete. And all of them were very radical geographers. Even William Bunge, if you remember, is one of those radicalists. Students often ask me, this doesn't look like geography at all. Somewhere it seems like we are more into political science and politics studies rather than geography. See, it's like this. This discussion is about how geography is evolving and its agenda is changing. And the moment I say that geography is the study of man-environment relationship, so we would like to know what are the factors that determine relationship, what are the factors that decide patterns. We would like to know how man perceives environment. We would like to know how environment impacts man. Why, like for the concept of place is very important. Where does man live? What is place in geography? What is space in geography? And these concepts, there is lot of political connotation to these. Like the place can become a territory that belongs to me. The moment I use the word belongs and rights, it becomes political science. So at a very superficial level, although it may look like we are in political science as a discipline, but these are influences of political science into geography. So a very rich interaction of geography with other disciplines. So please don't dismiss this as non-geography. Because when we're studying man-environment relationship, simple thing like where does man live? What does man grow? What does man trade in? Okay. How does man develop his cities? That's part of geography. A lot of these decisions and patterns are not the consequence of simple environmental determinism. It's the consequence of political policies. The kind of houses we make is not always economic factor. There are also political factors that restrict us through policies and bylaws. So the patterns in man-environment relationship, the patterns in how man operates on the environment is determined by the political environment. There is a political causation of why, how patterns develop. If you know about, or if you can recall the idea of how the structure of a city develops, who lives where, who operates where. So there is a sociology there, and there is a political science also operating there. So even if this looks like political science, this is actually a very important influence in geography. And geography as a problem solver, if geography is trying to solve the problem of spatial inequality, it has to get into the political reasons that create the inequality in the first place. So in that logic, these are still relevant to geography. So that is the radical geography, and again, this is a term I am increasingly using. All of these ultimately become what is postmodernism. Although in many ways, postmodernism was beyond Marxism, because postmodernism believed that Marxists did not pay enough attention to space and location. So a step beyond radical geography, a step beyond simple anti-capitalism was postmodernism as a school of thought that influenced geography also. So that's more or less the summary of this social revolution, or also called as the radical backlash in geography. You can keep the screen on the board on your screen for some time, make some jottings and revise, and I hope you can use it and the concepts in your answer. Thank you.